The most dangerous person in any room is rarely the loudest. He isn't constantly proving his intelligence. He doesn't rush to explain himself. He doesn't reveal every opinion. And he certainly doesn't let other people know what he's thinking, because he understands a truth that most people discover far too late. The moment people know exactly how you think, they know exactly how to influence you. Think about a poker game. The strongest player isn't always the one with the best cards. It's the one whose face reveals nothing, the one who forces everyone else to guess. Life works the same way. Every time you react impulsively, every time you overshare your plans, every time you explain your emotions, you hand people pieces of the map that leads directly to your mind. Most people don't manipulate strangers. They manipulate predictability. If they know what makes you angry, they can provoke you. If they know what makes you insecure, they can control your confidence. If they know what you're about to do, they can move before you do. Machiavelli understood this more than 500 years ago. Power does not belong to the person who speaks the most. It belongs to the person who reveals the least while observing the most. That is why kings rarely announced every strategy before battle. They created uncertainty, and uncertainty creates hesitation. Hesitation creates advantage. Imagine two generals preparing for war. The first proudly tells everyone exactly how he intends to attack. The second quietly studies the battlefield while saying almost nothing. Which one would make you nervous? Exactly. The unknown has always been more powerful than the obvious. Yet most people spend their lives trying to be understood. They explain every decision, every absence, every emotion, every change in behavior. They fear being misunderstood. The silent strategist fears something else: becoming predictable, because predictable people are easy to manipulate. Have you ever noticed how manipulators ask endless questions? Not because they're curious, because they're collecting data. What happened? What are you thinking? What are your plans? Why are you acting differently? Each answer becomes another piece of your psychological profile. Eventually, they know you better than you know yourself. And once someone can predict your reactions, they no longer have to control you. You'll control yourself. That is real psychological power. Not forcing people to obey, but understanding them so completely that they willingly follow patterns you already expected. Inside the Dark Mind Protocol, we go far beyond recognizing manipulation. You learn how to build a mind that is calm under pressure, unreadable in conflict, and almost impossible to influence emotionally. This video reveals only one layer of that system. If you're serious about mastering psychological discipline instead of simply learning interesting ideas, open the first pinned comment before you forget. Because knowledge changes nothing. Applied psychology changes everything. Today, you'll discover the 7 silent power rules inspired by Machiavelli that make powerful men almost impossible to read. The first rule may seem simple, but it quietly changes every relationship you'll ever have. Rule number 1, master calculated silence. Most men think silence is the absence of words. It isn't. Silence is the presence of control. Imagine 2 men sitting across from each other during a negotiation. The first fills every pause. He explains his reasons. He justifies his price. He reveals his concerns. He keeps talking because silence makes him uncomfortable. The second man simply listens. When the first finishes speaking, he waits. 3 seconds, 5 seconds, sometimes 10. Suddenly, the first man starts talking again. He lowers his own price, reveals more information, even begins solving problems nobody asked him to solve. Nothing changed except one thing. Silence created pressure, and pressure exposes people. This happens every single day, at work, in relationships, with family, on social media. Most people reveal themselves because they cannot tolerate empty space. The silent strategist understands that silence is not passive. It is active observation. The less you speak, the more everyone else reveals. Years ago, a wealthy merchant hired 2 advisors. Both were intelligent. Both understood business. But one constantly interrupted meetings to demonstrate how much he knew. The other spoke only after everyone else had finished. Months later, the merchant fired the first advisor, not because he lacked knowledge, because every meeting became about proving himself. The second advisor became indispensable. He listened, he observed, and when he finally spoke, every word carried weight. That is the strange law of communication. The fewer words people expect from you, the more valuable those words become. Scarcity creates value. This applies to money, to opportunities, and even to speech. The modern world encourages the opposite. Post everything. Explain everything. Respond immediately. Share every opinion. React to every controversy. But every unnecessary word gives people another opportunity to misunderstand you, judge you, or use your own words against you. Machiavelli understood that uncertainty is often more powerful than explanation. If people cannot fully predict you, they become cautious. And cautious people make fewer attempts to manipulate you. That doesn't mean becoming cold or antisocial. It means becoming intentional. Before speaking, ask yourself one question. Does saying this improve my position or simply satisfy my emotions? That single question can change your life. Imagine someone insults you in front of other people. Your emotions immediately demand revenge. Your pride wants the last word. But what happens if you don't react? Most people expect resistance. When resistance never comes, they become confused, sometimes embarrassed, sometimes uncomfortable. Sometimes they begin justifying themselves. Your silence becomes a mirror. People often reveal their own insecurity while trying to provoke yours. That is why emotional discipline is such an unfair advantage. It removes you from the battlefield where manipulators expect to fight. Inside the Dark Mind Protocol, one of the first principles we teach is that emotional invisibility creates psychological freedom. When people cannot predict your reactions, they lose one of their strongest methods of influence. The goal isn't to become mysterious for attention. The goal is to become emotionally stable enough that nobody can pull your strings. If today's lesson has already changed the way you see conversations, imagine what happens when you apply the complete system every day. The full Dark Mind Protocol is waiting in the first pinned comment. Because silence alone isn't power. Controlled silence is. And that brings us to the second rule. The rule that separates ordinary men from those who quietly control every room they enter. Rule number 2. Control what people know about you. Every piece of personal information is a tool. The question is simple. Who is using it? You or someone else? Most people believe honesty means complete transparency. It doesn't. Honesty means telling the truth. Transparency means revealing everything. Those are two very different things. Imagine you own a priceless vault filled with gold. Would you hand the combination to every person who seemed friendly? Of course not. Yet every day, people do exactly that with their minds. They reveal their fears, their frustrations, their ambitions, their financial problems, their relationship struggles, their future plans. Not because they have to, because talking feels good. There's a psychological reward for feeling understood. Manipulators know this. That is why they rarely begin by controlling you. They begin by listening. Have you ever met someone who asked dozens of questions during your very first conversation? What do you do? What are your goals? What happened in your last relationship? What stresses you the most? What are you afraid of? At first, it feels like genuine interest. Sometimes it is, but sometimes they are quietly building a psychological blueprint. Every answer becomes another button they can press later. Imagine meeting two entrepreneurs. The first tells you every business idea he plans to launch, every investment, every weakness in his company, every fear he has about the future. The second simply smiles. He talks about principles instead of private strategies. Months later, the first entrepreneur finds himself surrounded by competitors who somehow always seem one step ahead. The second quietly launches his project before anyone even realizes he was building it. Power rarely announces itself. It arrives prepared. Machiavelli understood that uncertainty forces people to respect possibilities. The moment everyone knows exactly what you're doing, they stop imagining what you might become. The unknown creates psychological space, and that space often becomes influence. This doesn't mean becoming secretive for the sake of appearing mysterious. It means understanding that not every thought deserves an audience. Not every dream requires validation. Not every victory should be announced before it happens. Look at nature. The tallest oak tree doesn't grow because it tells the forest about its roots every morning. Its strength develops underground, quietly, patiently, invisible to everyone. Your greatest transformations should happen the same way. Build first, reveal later, or perhaps never reveal at all. One of the biggest mistakes ambitious people make is announcing success before earning it. The moment they declare a goal, they receive praise, likes, encouragement. Their brain experiences a false sense of accomplishment. Ironically, that emotional reward often reduces the urgency to actually finish the work. The silent strategist protects unfinished goals, not because he's afraid of failure, because he understands that progress grows faster in silence. Inside the Dark Mind Protocol, we teach a principle called invisible momentum. The strongest transformations happen before the world notices you've changed. By the time people realize something is different, the work is already finished. If you're tired of explaining yourself, defending your decisions, or announcing plans that never become reality, the complete framework is waiting inside the Dark Mind Protocol. Open the first pinned comment before you leave this video, because real power is not making people believe you're changing. It's letting them discover that you've already changed. And that leads to the third rule, perhaps the most dangerous lesson Machiavelli ever understood. Never let emotion make your decisions before reason has had the chance to speak. Rule number 3. Never let emotion make decisions that logic will regret. Every manipulator has one objective, not to control your hands, to control your emotions. Because once your emotions are under their control, your decisions soon follow. Think about the last argument you witnessed. Maybe it happened at work, maybe at home, maybe online. Notice something. The person who lost wasn't always the one with the weaker argument. It was usually the one who lost emotional control first. The moment anger takes over, logic quietly leaves the room, and manipulators know exactly how to make that happen. They insult, they provoke, they ignore you, they disrespect you, not because they enjoy conflict, because emotion makes people predictable. Imagine a hunter standing beside a river. He doesn't chase every fish. He simply understands the current. Eventually, the fish swim exactly where he expected. Human behavior works the same way. Most people believe they're making independent choices. In reality, many are simply reacting to emotional triggers placed there by someone else. That is why the silent strategist never asks, "How do I win this argument?" He asks, "Who benefits if I lose control?" That single question changes everything. Years ago, a respected military commander received a letter filled with insults from one of his greatest rivals. His officers expected immediate retaliation. Instead, he folded the letter, placed it inside a drawer, and continued working. One officer couldn't understand. "General, aren't you going to answer him?" The commander smiled. "I already did." The officer looked confused. The commander continued. "The moment I refuse to react, his strategy fails." That is emotional warfare. Sometimes your greatest victory is denying another person the reaction they desperately wanted. Most people spend their entire lives believing strength means reacting. Real strength often means choosing not to. That doesn't mean accepting disrespect. It means refusing to surrender control of your mind. Because the moment another person decides how you feel, they've already begun deciding how you act. Inside the Dark Mind Protocol, we call this mental sovereignty, the ability to own your emotions before someone else rents them. And once you develop that skill, manipulation becomes dramatically easier to recognize. Not because manipulators disappear, because they stop finding emotional openings. Rule number 4, make people reveal themselves before you reveal yourself. Most conversations aren't conversations. They're investigations. People constantly test each other. Who talks first? Who becomes defensive? Who needs approval? Who is emotionally stable? Imagine sitting across from someone during a job interview. They ask you 10 questions. You answer every one. Then the interview ends. How much do you know about them? Almost nothing. Now, imagine reversing the dynamic. You answer briefly, then begin asking thoughtful questions. What do successful people here usually have in common? What challenges does the company face? What kind of leadership thrives here? Suddenly, you're no longer just being evaluated. You're collecting information. The same principle applies everywhere. Friendships, dating, business, negotiations. The person asking thoughtful questions often controls the direction of the conversation. Not because they're manipulative, because they're learning while everyone else is revealing. The silent strategist never rushes to become understood. He first seeks to understand, because information creates options, and options create power. Machiavelli believed that wise rulers observed far more than they announced. Not because silence was mysterious, because observation is impossible while you're constantly speaking. Every person carries invisible patterns, their fears, their ambitions, their insecurities, their desires. If you become patient enough, people almost always reveal them voluntarily. You don't need to force truth. You simply need to create enough space for it to appear. If you've stayed with me until this point, you're already different from most people. Most watch videos like this for entertainment. A few watch them for transformation, but almost nobody applies what they've learned consistently. That's exactly why I created the Dark Mind Protocol. Not as another book you'll read once and forget, but as a complete psychological operating system designed to help you become emotionally disciplined, mentally resilient, and extraordinarily difficult to manipulate. Every principle you've learned today is only one piece of a much larger framework. If you're serious about changing the way you think, not just collecting interesting ideas, open the first pinned comment now. Months from today, you'll either be living with the same emotional patterns, or you'll be operating with an entirely different mindset. That decision begins with one click. Before you leave, I want you to do something. Write these words in the comments. My mind belongs to me. Not for me, for yourself. Because every time you repeat that sentence, you're making a decision to stop giving other people control over your emotions, your reactions, and ultimately, your life. Remember this. The loudest man in the room is rarely the most powerful. The strongest man is often the one whose mind cannot be read, whose emotions cannot be controlled, and whose silence forces everyone else to wonder what he's thinking. That is the path of the silent strategist. And that is the beginning of the Dark Mind Protocol.